picture the silhouette. You know the one I mean. The Stetson hat, the dusty boots, the horse backlit by a blazing red sunset. It's the cowboy, the ultimate American icon of rugged individualism. He answers to no one, he needs no one, and he certainly doesn't ask for directions.
Right. It's an image that is just baked into our cultural DNA.
It really is the myth of total self-reliance.
The idea that a man and the horizon are all you really need to make a life.
Exactly. But here's the tension that fascinated me while reading through this stack of sources we have today. What happens when you take that stoic, unshakable figure?
The man who supposedly needs nothing.
Right, and you introduce the one thing that forces vulnerability, love.
That is the central conflict. It disrupts the entire lone wolf narrative. If the cowboy relies on someone else emotionally, does he, stop being a cowboy?
Today, we're doing a deep dive into Western romance literature. And I want to be clear right off the bat, we aren't just talking about the checkout aisle paperback.
Though we will definitely get to those.
Oh, we will. But we're talking about a massive literary tradition.
It's a huge genre, and what the sources argue is that it uses the Wild West as a kind of laboratory.
I loved that phrasing in the notes, the West as a laboratory. It's a space where writers test ideas about gender, race, and the conflict between freedom and civilization.
Absolutely.
We have sources here ranging from 19th century classics to modern sociological studies, and it turns out taming the cowboy is a lot more complex than just a simple love story.
Well, these stories act as a mirror. They reflect the values, the anxieties, and especially the prejudices of the times they were written in. It's a sociological study disguised as escapism.
So let's go back to the beginning, because I think there's a misconception, I certainly had it, that this genre started with mass-market paperbacks in the 1970s.
Oh, it goes back much, much further. We have to look at the early 1800s. You really can't talk about the Western without talking about James Fenimore Cooper.
The Last of the Mohicans.
The very same. He's often credited as the father of Western literature. His novel from 1826 is foundational. Now, most people remember the action or maybe the Daniel Day-Lewis movie.
Of course.
But the book established key romantic tropes that we still see today, specifically the captive heroine.
This is the classic damsel in distress in the wilderness, right?
It is, but with a specific cultural twist. Cooper set the framework where the frontier is dangerous, and the romance often involves a clash of cultures. But he built the frame. If you want the romance as we know it, the structure of the relationship, you have to look at Owen Wister.
Wister wrote The Virginian in 1902. The sources cite this as the first real Western. But what struck me was the class dynamic.
Yes.
It wasn't just a cowboy and a cowgirl on the range.
No, and that's the key innovation. The Virginian established the trope of the rough, uneducated cowboy falling for the refined, educated Eastern schoolteacher.
It's basically Lady and the Tramp on the Prairie.
In a way, yes. But Wister was doing something specific. He was mixing romance with social realism. The conflict wasn't just will they kiss, it was a conflict of heritage.
So the woman represents civilization.
Literacy, manners, religion, the East Coast establishment. The cowboy represents natural nobility, integrity, grit, the West.
So the romance is actually a negotiation between the East and the West. It's asking if these two Americas can actually live together.
That is the core question. And in The Virginian, it cemented that core conflict.
Yeah.
Can love survive in a place that's basically designed to kill you?
But if Wister wrote the blueprint, the guy who built the factory and made a fortune doing it was Zane Grey.
You cannot discuss this genre without Zane Grey. He is the heavyweight champion.
His stats are insane. Riders of the Purple Sage, published in 1912, the sources mention he created a very specific formula that basically printed money.
A heady mixture is what one historian calls it.
It was a mixture that hadn't really been tried before to that extent.
Right. Grey combined brutal, graphic violence with saccharine, almost melodramatic romance.
It's a weird combo when you think about it. Bullets flying, people dying, blood in the dust, and then flowery, poetic declarations of love.
It seems contradictory, but it worked because it heightened the stakes. The violence made the love feel more precious, and the love made the violence feel more tragic.
But it wasn't a sure bet initially.
No.
I found this anecdote in the notes absolutely hilarious. So Grey writes, Riders of the Purple Sage, he submits it, and his publisher hates it.
They wanted to reject it outright.
Specifically, they didn't like how harsh he was toward the Mormon characters and the depiction of polygamy.
They thought it was too controversial, too rough, a huge risk for a publisher at the time.
But then, the publisher's wife reads the manuscript And she loves it. She essentially tells her husband, "You are an idiot if you don't print this."
And he listens to her, and it becomes a massive bestseller.
It's a great reminder that the female audience has always been a driving force in this genre, even when the industry was run by men.
But speaking of women, we need to look at the women inside Gray's books, because this is where that mirror of the times gets a little, well, very conservative.
Yeah, these weren't exactly feminist icons.
Far from it. Gray's heroines were typically virginal, morally pure, and completely reliant on the hero. They were there to be saved. But it wasn't just about being passive. It was an active political statement by Gray.
I saw the note about the deerstalker from 1925. The heroine, Patricia, seems to be fighting a culture war.
She is. I mean, think about the 1920s. You have the roaring 20s, flappers, women bobbing their hair short, smoking cigarettes, asserting independence in the cities. Gray hated that.
He saw it as a moral decline.
Exactly. So he writes Patricia Edgerton to specifically reject all of that. She keeps her long hair. She doesn't smoke. Gray was using the Western romance to champion old-world values against the scary changes of the 20th century.
He's saying the real American woman is the ranch woman, not the city flapper.
It's nostalgia weaponized. He's using the romance to tell women this is how you should be.
But to be fair to the timeline, the sources point out that we shouldn't paint the whole era with that brush. There was Catherine Sedgwick.
Yes, a crucial counterpoint. She wrote Hope Leslie way back in 1827. A female writer in a male-dominated field, and she offered a completely different perspective.
Her women were different.
Unconventional, independent, and notably, she viewed Native Americans through a non-racist lens, which was incredibly rare for the time.
So even back then, you had this tension within the genre, the conservative tame the woman narrative versus the more subversive woman survives the wild narrative.
That tension never really goes away. It just changes shape.
Which brings us to the mid-20th century. We move from these dense hardcover novels to the magazine racks, the era of ranch romances.
Rangeland love stories.
Yeah.
These were hugely popular in the 1950s, and they introduced a fascinating character archetype that the sources call the your sister trope.
Your sister, that sounds oddly specific.
It was a way to describe the vibe. The idea was that the heroine wasn't a helpless victim like in the Cooper era, but she wasn't a femme fatale or a sex symbol either.
So somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, she was independent, courageous. Maybe she ran the ranch herself because her father died. But she maintained her traditional femininity. She was the kind of girl you'd want your sister to be.
So it's a step toward agency, but still very safe. She can hold a gun, but she still wants to get married.
Exactly. It allowed women to read about independent heroines without feeling like they were challenging the social status quo of the 1950s.
But then the 1970s hit. The paperback revolution. Harlequin and Mills and Boone take over the market.
And the safe approach goes right out the window.
This is the era of the bodice ripper.
I feel like everyone knows that term, but maybe doesn't know where it comes from.
It refers to the cover art, right? A woman with her dress torn, being clutched by a muscular hero.
Right, but it also refers to the content. This is where the genre gets caught in a massive cultural crossfire.
The feminist critique. In the 1980s, Janice Radway wrote a famous study on this, basically arguing that these books were anti-feminist trash.
Radway argued that the genre was problematic because it fetishized aggressive, sometimes borderline abusive heroes. The dynamic was often a forceful man and a submissive woman.
And the critique was, why are women reading fantasies about being dominated?
But the sources highlight a defense that I found really compelling. Scholars like Lee Tobin McLean argue that Radway kind of missed the point.
How so?
They argue we need to look closer at who is telling the story. Unlike pure westerns, the Louis Lunar-style books written for men, these romances are female-led. They focus on the woman's interiority, her fears, her desires.
Okay, but how do they defend the aggressive hero? How is that a female power fantasy?
The argument is that the fantasy isn't about being abused. It's about being the only one who can tame the dangerous man. The hero is a symbol of rugged, violent masculinity. He's dangerous to everyone else.
But she changes him.
She takes him and domesticates him. She brings him into the fold of civilization. It's Beauty and the Beast. The power comes from changing the beast into a prince.
A fantasy of emotional transformative power.
It is. And it's worth noting, as the genre has evolved, the violence that was criticized back then has largely disappeared. Modern Western romances rarely depict that kind of aggression. Consent is key now.
So we've looked at the timeline from Cooper to the bodice rippers. But one of the biggest surprises for me in this stack of sources was that the Wild West isn't exclusive to America.
No, it is not. The frontier is a global concept.
And we have to talk about Australia, the outback
It's a
romance.
huge subgenre. Instead of cowboys, you have stockmen and jackaroos.
And Jillaroos. But the vibe, it's different. The American Western, generally speaking, has this underlying optimism, manifest destiny, the triumph of good over evil.
Right. The American frontier is presented as a land of opportunity, a place where you can reinvent yourself. The Australian frontier is presented as a place that wants to kill you.
The sources use the word mortality a lot. It feels much heavier.
The Australian rural romance is decidedly darker. The outback is severe. It's isolating. The themes in these books, like Rachel Treasure's Jillaroo from 2002, deal with things like suicide, severe depression, hopelessness.
Suicide seems like an incredibly heavy topic for a romance novel. Usually, you want a happy ever after.
It is heavy, but it reflects the reality of the landscape they are writing about.
Mhm.
The American myth, isolation makes you a rugged individualist. In the Australian myth, isolation can drive you mad.
So the romance is more about survival.
It's about two people clinging to each other because the world outside is just too big and too empty.
That makes sense. The landscape dictates the story. But speaking of the landscape and who lives on it, we need to address the elephant in the room.
Race.
We can't talk about Westerns without talking about race.
No, we can't, and we shouldn't. For a vast majority of its history, the Western romance was fundamentally racist.
We mentioned Cooper and the captive heroine earlier. That whole trope relies on the Native American character being the villain.
The Indian-killing, heroine-rescuing cowboy was the standard setup for over a century. The Native American was the other, the threat to civilization, and the white woman's virtue. He was tied to white American patriotism.
To love the cowboy was to love the expansion of white America. But there was a shift in the 90s. I remember Dances with Wolves being a huge moment.
A massive moment. The 1990s brought a wave of revisionism. Dances with Wolves was praised for having multi-dimensional Native American characters who weren't just faceless villains.
It demystified the white expansion narrative. But the sources here are a bit critical of it, too.
Rightfully so, because if you look at the romance in Dances with Wolves, who is it between?
It's Kevin Costner and, well, a white woman who was raised by the tribe.
Exactly, it's still two white protagonists.
Oh.
So while the backdrop became more nuanced and sympathetic, the core romantic structure hadn't fully integrated indigenous perspectives as the leads.
That's a really important distinction. It's we see you, but you're still supporting characters in our romance.
Yes. And we see a similar tension when we look at sexuality. This is probably the most interesting evolution in the last 20 years, queering the frontier.
Which, when you think about it, makes perfect sense. The Western has always been about men without women, living on the fringes of society.
It's an incredibly homosocial environment. You have movies like Midnight Cowboy or Desert Hearts in the 80s. But the cultural earthquake was obviously Brokeback Mountain in 2005.
I rewatched that recently, and what struck me is how it uses the classic Western tropes against the genre.
Or rather, it uses the tools to tell a new story. Think about the standard Western setup, the freedom of the wild versus the restrictions of civilization.
Usually civilization means the law, or the bank, or the railroad.
Right. But in Brokeback Mountain, the wild is the only place where their love can exist. The mountain represents the freedom to be themselves. Civilization, 1950s society, is a restrictive force that tries to crush that love.
That is such a brilliant inversion. It takes the cowboy versus society structure and applies it to a same-sex romance perfectly.
It exposes the tragedy of the genre. The cowboy is free on the range, but he's trapped by the expectations of who he is supposed to be. It shows that the frontier isn't just a place for shooting bandits. It's a place where social rules break down.
And sometimes that's exactly what love needs. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from Cooper's captives to the fatalism of the outback. But I want to ask the so what question. Why does this genre keep surviving?
It's resilient, isn't it?
It really is. We don't ride horses to work. Most of us live in cities. Why do we still watch this stuff?
I think it's the hybridity. The genre is a chameleon. It can be a thriller, a melodrama, a comedy. You have Amish westerns, contemporary ranch romances. But at the core, I think it persists because the cowboy hero represents something we feel we've lost.
A sense of simplicity.
Simplicity and efficacy. In a modern world that feels very complicated and very gray, the Western offers black and white solutions. It offers a hero who can fix things with his hands and his courage.
And for the romance reader, it offers a heroine who can see the soft heart underneath that rough exterior. the hope that connection is possible even with the most guarded people.
Exactly. The genre isn't static. It evolves to reflect us. It took on feminism in the 70s, revisionist history in the 90s. It's taking on LGBTQ themes now. The backdrop stays the same, but the story is always about now.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. We've talked about how the Western romance is about the fragility of love in a harsh landscape. The frontier was the place where love was most at risk.
Right, where the environment itself was hostile to connection.
So if the genre is always evolving,
Hmm.
what is our frontier today? Where is the modern Wild West, where love feels the most vulnerable and the landscape feels the most hostile?
That's a big question.
Is it the internet, the disconnect of the digital age? Or is it still just two people trying to make it work against the odds, regardless of the setting? Maybe the frontier isn't in place on a map anymore.
Maybe it's just the distance between two people.
That is a question worth pondering. Thanks for riding out with us on this deep dive.
Happy trails.